Life can be chaotic. If you're running a retail business, don't let disorganized order fulfillment add to the chaos. Use ShipStation instead. With ShipStation, you never have to worry about shipping and fulfillment again. Whether you're running a business out of your garage or you have multiple warehouses, ShipStation is ideal for every phase of your business's growth. Save time with one login for all your stores and by automating repetitive tasks. Plus, you'll save money with the best shipping rates from global carriers. ShipStation's industry-leading features help you deliver a better customer experience. They'll get accurate and faster shipments along with automated tracking updates with your branding. And with up to 88% off UPS and USPS rates and up to 90% off FedEx rates, ShipStation is the fastest and most affordable way to ship. Calm the chaos. Switch to ShipStation today. Start a free trial at shipstation.com/audio. That's shipstation.com/audio.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Well, the big story today is easy to pinpoint. It's Election Day in Canada. A 28-day campaign concludes. Canadians are heading to the polls to pick their new government. And what a wild campaign it's been. Instead of Justin Trudeau or the carbon tax being discussed, as many thought it would be months ago, it was Donald Trump, the U.S. president, that dominated the chatter on the hustings. What are we going to see tonight is the big question. Who's going to win? Joining us on the big story is our national political reporter, Cormac Sweeney, who's been following this campaign right from the get-go. Cormac, glad you could be with us today.
Good to be here, Richard.
I mean, it's the big story here is just how this campaign has swung around. I mean, it sure looked like the Conservatives were cruising to victory. Now, not so much. Cormac, how did we get here?
Yeah, it's a really wild story. Like, not only has this campaign been crazy, but 2025 as a year has been nuts covering federal politics. We started the year with 2025 beginning on the strike of midnight, and it looked like the Conservatives had this in the bag. It was a 25-point lead, depending on the poll, a 25-point lead roughly for the Conservatives. They were laughing, and it seemed like the Liberals were stuck with a leader who was facing, not only fatigue from voters, but also questions from within, where Liberal caucus members started calling for Justin Trudeau to go because they felt he wasn't the right leader to lead them into the next election. And on January 6th, everything changed. Justin Trudeau decided to resign as prime minister, and that led to a series of events that got us to where we are today. He left. Donald Trump was threatening tariffs on Canada. He was going to be taking over the White House, threatening tariffs on the first or second day. And as the Liberals started to go through their leadership race, we started to notice the shift. Voters who were unhappy with Justin Trudeau started to move back towards the Liberals. There was a leadership race, which always helps the party going through that leadership race. It gives them a lot of extra attention, a bit of a boost in the polls. And then when they chose Mark Carney as the leader, while the country was facing an economic threat, you have this former Bank of Canada, Bank of England governor whose focus was solely on the economy. That seemed to help the Liberals. And we entered this campaign with Mark Carney wasting no time calling this vote. He could have waited until October if he really wanted to, but coming off of the honeymoon that he had, becoming leader, he decided to call this election right away. And that's where we were, a tight two-party race between the Liberals and the Conservatives when it looked like the Liberals were dead in the water and the Conservatives were going to laugh all their way to the Prime Minister's office at the start of the new year.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I mean, the question now is who is going to win tonight? You're looking at the polls, Cormac, and I guess most all of them are pointing towards a Liberal victory tonight, but there are still some big questions, right?
Yeah, look, the old saying that you'll hear from a lot of party leaders is the only poll that matters is the poll on election day, and to an extent that is true. The public opinion polls show you a trend, show you where people are heading, and then you have these seat projections where people try to parse out through those polls how it will impact certain ridings in certain regions of the country. And you get these projections that say it could be Liberal majority, Liberal minority, maybe a Conservative government, who knows? But yeah, we have seen surprises before on election night, so anything can really happen. But there are different paths to victories here for the different parties. So for the Liberals, they'll be looking a lot at Atlantic Canada, Quebec, and Ontario. And those polls will be getting those results earlier on in the night than we will, let's say, in BC. But they'll be looking, if they can manage to sweep Atlantic Canada, or at least practically sweep Atlantic Canada, and have a really strong showing in Quebec and Ontario, then that might be able to allow them to talk about a Liberal government, whether it's minority or majority. However, there are different factors that could be at play here. The Bloc Québécois has recently been improving in its polls and has been making a shift in its messaging to try and get more of their voters who went to the Liberals back to their side. If they can have a much stronger showing in Quebec than maybe what the polls are even showing right now, then that could really change the dynamic. And then maybe it would be, if the Conservatives can still pick up more of those GTA seats and more of those seats that are not just the rural seats in Ontario, then we could be seeing a different dynamic as we head to the prairies, where they will likely be dominated by the Conservatives. And in that case, if the Conservatives are more competitive than expected, as the polls are showing right now, this could all come down to British Columbia. It could be a very late night for everybody, because BC is going to be a very tight race right now. If you believe some of the projections, it could be just a matter of 2 or 3 seats between the Conservatives and the Liberals. The NDP has been making a really strong push in the end to try and bring back some of their voters. They've got a strong base in British Columbia. If they can draw more of those voters and save some of the seats that could potentially be shifting towards the Liberals or even the Conservatives, then that could really change the dynamic. So it could be a really late night, and it might not be as clear as we think, or maybe it will be. We'll have to wait and see how the projections come. And I think this really comes down to Quebec and British Columbia, with the late sort of rise from the NDP and the Bloc Québécois, and the impact that could have on the Liberal results.
Yeah, it is pretty exciting. And as you say, it could be a late night for political junkies on the East Coast, staying up to watch and hopefully listen to it all. You and I will have, of course, full coverage on the Rogers Radio Network tonight. Cormac, there's been some reporting on Pierre Poilievre's Ottawa riding, some suggestion that he could lose it. Do you think that riding is in play tonight?
I think you speak with a lot of experts about who could be at risk of losing their job, and I think there are some party leaders who might be at risk of losing their job if they don't pull off a victory tonight. But I think it's very clear, if you don't win your seat as a party leader, it makes it very difficult for you to continue on in that position. Now, the Carleton riding is actually quite interesting, because this is the longest ballot in the country, the so-called longest ballot campaign, which is really to try and shine a light on the need for electoral reform in Canada. And that campaign, that protest, sees a bunch of independents sign up to create civil disruption. It's legal. It's perfectly legal. This is allowed in our democracy. As long as you fit the criteria to run, you can run in an election. That's the whole point of democracy. But they're taking advantage of that to try and protest our current first-past-the-post system. So there are 91 candidates on that ballot. So it's really going to be interesting to see how that impacts the vote in the riding of Carleton. There have been reports that the Conservatives have shifted resources to try and pour more people in there to save that seat. However, the party denies that is the case and that they feel that it's a safe seat for Pierre Poilievre. He has held that seat for a long time, I think around 20 years or so. He's been there for a very long time. We'll see what happens in that riding. I know the Liberals, with their candidate, Bruce Fanjoy, are really hoping that they can create that upset on election night. It might be a tight finish. Sometimes with those riding results, it's really hard to tell unless you're doing extensive polling on the doorsteps. And most pollsters don't really have that option. They use mathematical equations based on regions, based on a whole number of different criteria to try and give you an accurate viewing of what's going to happen there. The Conservatives are confident they're going to keep that seat. It would be definitely a surprise anytime a leader loses their seat. But there are other leaders as well who are facing similar questions. The NDP is Jagmeet Singh. He is in a battle for his Burnaby seat. A lot of the polls show that it's a battle between the Liberals and Conservatives, and he may be in a distant third. So we'll see what happens with that race, whether his recent push in Vancouver and BC that he's been doing at the tail end of this campaign pays off in helping him retain his seat. Green Party co-leader Elizabeth May also potentially could be facing a challenge by the Conservative candidate in Saanich Gulf Islands. So a lot could happen with the leaders tonight. It's not just whether the parties form government or not, but some people's jobs could be on the line as well.
Even if Mr. Poilievre holds on to his Carleton riding, if the Conservatives don't win tonight, if they don't form government, will Mr. Poilievre be under pressure to resign tonight on election night, you think, Cormac?
Anytime a party doesn't form government, I think there are always questions and conversations that have to be had about the future of the party, potentially, sort of hitting the reset button to see what might work better next time. I think there was an expectation for sure when Pierre Poilievre took over the leadership, at least from the Conservative side, that he would not be like his predecessors of Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer, that it wouldn't be a one and done deal, that he would have at least 2 elections to try and beat the Liberals and form the next government of Canada. And there's something to be said about having a little bit of consistency there. However, if there have been questions. This is a storyline that's come up through the campaign. We heard Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager, Corey Tenike, bring up early in the campaign that he didn't think that the Conservatives were pivoting enough. And he was quite critical of the way the Conservatives were handling their campaign, saying they're not focusing enough on Donald Trump. They're missing the mark. I think the term that Corey Tenike used was campaign malpractice. So that was setting the stage and setting the conversation for questions about Pierre Poilievre's leadership. And we've heard that throughout the campaign. So I think it's going to be a conversation if he's not able to form government. I think that the conversation's already started because of Conservatives throughout this leadership campaign. And then there were reports of not only issues and problems within the Ontario government and its relationship with the federal Conservatives, but in the final days, Pierre Poilievre showed up in Nova Scotia for a rally. Premier Tim Houston didn't show up at that rally and then released a video of himself saying, "I am Nova Scotian," which led to speculation. Maybe he might be looking ahead and potentially looking at the federal leadership as a possible option for himself. So a lot of speculation about who is maneuvering, who might be interested in certain positions before we've even had this election and the results have even been read yet. If it's a minority government, that's going to change the equation and the conversation quite a bit, because if it's a slim minority or at least a close enough minority government for the Liberals, if they're able to form that government, then that changes the conversation. Would the Conservatives want to even shift leaders or shift strategies if it's going to be close and we could be heading to an election at any moment? So we'll have to wait and see what the election results are and where those conversations go in the future, because again, I think all parties will have to have those conversations if they don't perform the way their members and the way their parties expect.
You might have hit on a good point there that if there is a minority one way or another, the way things are right now, we could be doing this election again pretty soon, right?
That's the beauty of our parliamentary democracy, is that when you have minority governments, there could be an election at any moment. However, we have had in the past where the Governor General has denied an election. It happened once, the King Byng affair, where the Governor General said, I'm not going to go right to an election right away after we just had an election, and then offered the opposition parties the chance to seek the confidence of the House. Because technically, even if you win the election, you have to seek the confidence of the House and keep that confidence, even if you are a government. But if you have a majority government, that sort of takes that confidence question away. In a minority, though, anything can happen.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Cormac, you're looking at the polls, and it looks like the NDP is about to get decimated. I mean, they might even lose official party status. What the heck happened to the NDP here?
Experts say that the part of the issue here is that the threat of Donald Trump and the existential crisis our country is facing, with threats of sovereignty, with threats of trade deals being ripped up, jobs, recessions, it basically became a two-horse race because voters started to look at who could potentially form government and then basically were forced to pick a side. And that's the way the experts have been framing it. And we saw a change of messaging from the NDP later in the campaign, but a very clear change of messaging where instead of saying, we want to be your next government, we're going to form your next government, they started to shift the language from that to, we want to hold the next government to account. And we saw something similar from the Bloc Québécois as well, where they started to look at the polling numbers and the potential projections, and they shifted their strategy to, and their terminology was basically like, look, Mark Carney's going to form government, and we want to be the voice of Quebec in that government. We can be your voice. And so it was very interesting to see the shifting dynamic in their messaging. And so for the NDP and the Bloc Québécois, experts, political scientists say they sort of got squeezed out of the conversation, or at least out of the views of voters when they were looking at this crisis with Donald Trump and the U.S. trade war. So they did change, they did adapt, and they are looking to still make gains or make inroads or salvage seats in what has become more of a two-horse race. But again, we'll have to wait and see what happens on election night, whether they're able to pull that off. The issue and the problem for the NDP is watching all the rallies in the lead up to election day. A lot of the questions turn from the policy questions to what is the future going to hold? What is victory to you? Those are questions that you don't want to be taking as a party and as a leader in the lead up to election day. However, they're trying to reframe things and bring some of those people back. And we did see a boost for the NDP and a boost for the Bloc Québécois as they change those strategies. And that could be potentially a wild card in how the outcome turns out tonight.
You know, in campaigns like these, we always hope for a good debate on the issues and a substantive debate, and you want to talk policy and all this. But whether you want to admit it or not, a lot of us want a little scandal too, or are certainly interested in reading about it should anything scandalous come up. Cormac, did anything scandalous come up during this campaign?
I mean, there were a few scandals that did pop up through the campaign. One would be, and I shouldn't say scandals. I don't think they hit the level of scandal. You go through the 2019 election where we had the blackface scandal with the prime minister. That hit the level of scandal. There were some controversies, though, throughout this. There were questions, for sure, that were being raised, especially for the Liberals, let's say. It would be about Mark Carney's personal business interests. And while he did put all of those into a blind trust so that he could keep sort of an ethical screen where he wasn't going to personally benefit off of his decisions as prime minister or through this election campaign, there were still questions that the opposition parties brought up. They said, the Conservatives tried to pin some of his decisions or his policy choices back to Brookfield, something that the NDP did as well. There were questions about the use that Brookfield had of offshore tax havens, and the Liberals and Mark Carney defended that. And Carney saying, look, I was chosen to do these investments for things like pension plans for Canadians and for Canadian businesses. And, they paid their taxes here in Canada in the end. We just use this different avenue, which is the legal avenue, to try and help them gain more money, which brought more money back to the economy. That was the defense that they had. But of course, the NDP saying they wanted to crack down on tax loopholes, something the Conservatives said as well. And so they made that a part of the campaign. Foreign interference. There were questions, in between the last election and this one, huge issues around foreign interference, a huge spotlight. We had questions about India, committing violent acts, allegations of agents of the Indian government committing violent acts and murder here on Canadian soil, questions about China's involvement in trying to influence campaigns and previous campaigns, including through WeChat. And we did get a bit of that happening through this campaign. I mean, there was a Liberal candidate who had to withdraw from the race, Paul Chang, because he had said that he thought a Conservative candidate in this race, Joe Tay, he made a comment that he thought he should be turned in to Hong Kong authorities. Now, Joe Tay was very vocal, pro-democracy, and Hong Kong authorities didn't like that. And so he was one of several people who basically had a bounty put on him to be returned to authorities there. Even the foreign affairs minister, when that happened, had said that was wrong. And so those comments from the Liberal candidate obviously were not helpful for him at all, and put a lot of spotlight on the issue of foreign interference. And there were questions about that. There were also foreign interference issues that were brought up about WeChat and sharing of posts from an account that was linked to the Chinese government that largely seemed to be positive of Mark Carney, but obviously no direct connection between the Liberal campaign in any way and this effort by the Chinese government. But that sort of popped up. And I think one other sort of controversy that popped up is one that you might be familiar as well with, Richard, is the whole battle between the Doug Ford government or people within the Doug Ford government and closely connected to the premier, and that battle with the federal Conservatives when the campaign manager, Corey Tonight, came out and just blasted the federal Conservatives, which raised a lot of questions about motives on that side and whether or not there's something else at work here. So
I cover the Ontario Premier on a day-to-day basis, and it has been interesting how Doug Ford has handled this whole federal, the leadership race and now the campaign. He spoke highly of Mark Carney. In fact, Doug Ford had brunch with Mark Carney the day after he won the Liberal leadership. But the Ontario Premier hasn't said literally anything about Pierre Poilievre. I don't even think he's mentioned him by name. There was a report in the Toronto Star that Mr. Poilievre waited a number of weeks before he called and congratulated Premier Ford on his recent re-election as Premier in Ontario. Sources indicate to me that there might be some concern on the part of Premier Ford that a Poilievre winning, that if Poilievre won and he was prime minister, that he may cut transfers to Ontario, and that may make life economically difficult for Premier Ford. Whatever the reason is, though, it's been super interesting that you kind of have this conservative, maybe the most powerful conservative right now in Canada, in Doug Ford, kind of, in not so many words, maybe campaigning against Poilievre. I mean, it's pretty interesting, isn't it, Cormac?
Yeah, and then the Minister of Education as well, sending a letter out to parents across the province about the future of daycare. And I will point out that letter did not mention a political party or mention the election, but it did say the federal government's current funding model wraps up April 2026. And I think, you can read between the lines maybe, but
because Poilievre has not committed to funding this $10 a day program, correct?
His language is important there. The platform commits to honor all existing deals with the provinces. The thing is that funding model wraps up April 2026 and has to be renewed. And the whole point of that was that there were not long-term funding models, but that they could continually renew on whatever timeline the provinces and the feds agree. And the Conservatives are the only ones that haven't really committed to much longer term sustainability for that program. And I think that's the impression a lot of people got while reading that. And you definitely saw it online where people were claiming that this is basically the Ford government telling people to vote for somebody other than the Conservatives. And so it's very interesting to see the dynamics that were at play through that. But
you wonder, too, does Doug Ford want this job, the federal Conservative leadership? He was asked that last week, and he said no, he didn't. But, well, maybe like Tim Houston, maybe, who knows, maybe there is some positioning going on there. I don't know, Cormac. But it's going to be interesting. It has been a super interesting campaign, and it's going to be an interesting night. You're going to be with Liberal leader Mark Carney tonight, right?
Yeah, I'll be at the Liberal campaign in an arena, and I believe you're going to be with the Conservatives at a convention center close to Parliament Hill. It's going to be a very interesting night, and especially when it comes to mood. I think when you get to those things, you've had your fair share of election nights, as I have as well. When you start to cover them the night of, you start to get a bit of the mood of the room, and you can sense certain things from the people that you're speaking to about where things might be heading on that night. So it'll be fascinating to see what the mood is when we get there and set up at these election night events, and what we're hearing from the camps about where they think things might head. Because it's, they always want to campaign as if they're from behind. That's the old adage, if you will, and they always want to appear confident. But sometimes their choice of words, the attitude, the tone of voice really can say a lot until those election results start coming in.
Yeah, we'll take the temperature for you. We'll have the blow-by-blow coverage for you tonight on your local Rogers radio station or the Seeker app. Cormac McSweeney, our big Ottawa reporter. Thanks for joining us today, Cormac.
Anytime, Richard.
That was the big story. You can send us feedback on this episode or any episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at area code 416-935-5935. You can also find us on that aforementioned Seeker app, that's SEEKR, or on all your favorite podcast players. Please rate, review, follow, and share. I'm Richard Southern. Thanks for listening.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.